The question is that the motion be agreed to.
Mr Speaker.
Sue Moroney.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, this bill and its introduction is another example of what we saw in Parliament last week, where the government has a big problem to solve and it takes a small number of measures that actually won't address the elephant in the room. So just like with housing, where they're just tinkering around the edges and not addressing the main problem, here we go again, but this time it's tinkering with an ever-increasing road toll. Because that is the problem, Mr Speaker, that this bill ought to be trying to address. Because in an environment where over the course of several decades now, the road toll has been coming down in New Zealand progressively over decades, as it should, because as we get safer roads to drive on, as we get safer technologies into our vehicles, of course that has an impact on bringing the road toll down. But somehow that government has managed to turn that positive trend around. And what we find is that right now, this government is leading us into the third consecutive year in a row where the road toll is going up. So in 2013, we had an all-time low, actually, for the road toll, and that was great news. There were 253 total road deaths. Shouldn't call that great news, because for those families and the friends of those people who perished on our roads, obviously that is a tragedy. But it was a sign that the road toll was coming down. However, since then, this government's managed to turn it around and get it going up in the wrong direction. So in 2014, there were 293 deaths on our roads, and in 2015, we were back up to 319 deaths on our road. And the news this year so far is even worse, Mr Speaker, because as at the 15th of September this year, 225 people had perished on our roads. That equates to a road toll of 220 at the same time last year. So again, this government's about to break its record. It's about to have an ever-increasing road toll. This bill should be addressing that issue, but it's not. It is simply tinkering around the edges, because while the bill does actually address heavy vehicles and purports to bring in some measures to make it easier to, ping the heavy vehicle operators if they aren't complying with the rules, unfortunately the rules that government brings in keeps letting heavier and heavier trucks on our roads. And of course, that drives up our road toll. That alone, that measure that government are pursuing, is one of the things that is driving up our road toll. How do we know this? We know this because about 18% of the deaths on our roads are caused by a truck, or have a truck involved in that accident. 18%, despite the fact that heavy vehicles actually only account for 6% of the vehicles on our roads. So they are disproportionately causing harm, and yet our government thinks that the way to address that is to keep introducing heavier and longer and higher trucks onto our roads. Well, it's no wonder, Mr Speaker, that our road toll keeps going up. So sadly, this bill isn't addressing the measures that it ought to. However, the measures that it does bring in are slight improvements. There's nothing here that we would oppose. So the Labour Party will be supporting this to first reading, but we'll be very interested in listening to the debate from the submitters as they come and submit on these measures. Mr Speaker, I can't speak on this bill without cautioning the government about the things that it needs to address that it's not addressing in this bill that will bring down the road toll. For a start, this government can pass any law it likes, but that law is not worth anything unless they are prepared to enforce it. And I want to hear from a government member about their commitment to enforce this legislation, because at the moment, this government is allowing small passenger services to openly flout the law, to skite about it, to publicly acknowledge that they are flouting the law, and the government is turning a blind eye. So, Mr Speaker, part of this bill does bring in new regulations to cover the small passenger services. I want that government to understand that there is no point in changing the law. There is no point in bringing in regulations unless it has the guts to enforce those measures. And to date, the government has not shown that it actually has the ability to do that when it comes to the small passenger vehicle fleet. Mr Speaker, while I'm talking on that measure, the government also needs to get some guts when it comes to actually ensuring that all the players in the small passenger services area are paying the tax that they're supposed to be paying as well. And I hope that the government will bring a measure in another bill to ensure that that continues to happen. On the issue of small passenger vehicle services, the Labour Party does agree with the measures that the government is taking in terms of the regulatory changes it is making, because we believe that we need a safe, accessible and efficient small passenger service, but we want one that provides decent paying jobs. And that should be the subject of another piece of legislation. In fact, that could have been the subject of a piece of legislation that government voted down only 2 weeks ago in this Parliament. The bill brought forward by my colleague, the Honourable David Parker, to ensure that contractors had to be paid at least the minimum wage, actually is an issue that needs addressing when it comes to the small passenger vehicle services that are provided in this country. So again, the big issues that actually will impact on safety, will impact on regulations, will actually make sure that we have a safe and efficient service in place are being voted down by this government. They are the ideas that have been brought forward by the Labour Party that would actually make a difference. Mr Speaker, it's also very disappointing to see that there is nothing in this bill that addresses that government's shameful record when it comes to driver licensing fraud. Because we know that there has been, and in fact, it's uncovered by the media, not the government themselves, but uncovered by the media, substantial driver licensing fraud happening on our roads here in New Zealand. That puts every other motorist at danger, and yet, in this amendment bill that does cover a whole range of issues, regulatory issues in the transport sector, not one of these measures is designed to address that problem. So again, another example of the government trying to look busy in this area, trying to look like it's doing something to bring the road toll down, but ignoring the major features that make our roads unsafe, and they've become more unsafe under that government. Mr Speaker, I want to conclude my contribution by reminding people that this government has also cut the road policing, the amount of road policing that is happening in this country. And again, this legislation does nothing to address that. In fact, this legislation brings in a whole range of measures that need to be policed. If you look at the regulations that have been brought in, or the legislation that's been brought in under the 6 parts of this bill, they all require more resourcing from our police department. But what has that government done? It has actually sidelined the resourcing from our policing department, and what we know is it's the road policing that has taken a big hit, and it's no wonder that our road toll keeps climbing under those circumstances. So, Mr Speaker, the Labour Party is supporting the small measures that are being implemented in this bill. There are some areas that I'm sure we'll have some robust discussion about at the Select Committee, but our great disappointment, Mr Speaker, is that the government has not taken the opportunity to fix up the very big problems that exist on our roads. It's of concern to me that we don't have ministers of transport who understand what the big drivers are of the deaths on our roads. And I hope that through the Select Committee process, we can convince that government to take the measures they really need to take in order to address this issue. So I look forward to that that discussion at Select Committee, and hopefully we can make this a meaningful bill.
Mr. Speaker.